Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall, it's Lester. You can hear me? Mr. Hall?
All right, folks, I'm gonna give it about 3 more minutes and then I'm gonna start.
Sir, you see my message, sir?
Okay, but why haven't you checked it?
Sir, when I arrived at school, Miss Hyde was literally leaving because we have a class
No, but I mean
in the night.
your thing should be available online, right?
Oh no, sir, I'm having issues with that. Yeah, and when I went there, as I said, Miss Hyde, um, she was leaving the same time through the gate and everything. Because it was at night class and stuff. If you can, if you don't know, sir,
I
that's fine,
mean, I don't know the final tally. I sent all the grades in. And I'm not home at the moment. I'm actually doing this from another location. So I don't have my
But
laptop with me. I'm
okay
using
then,
some another computer.
would you say that everyone did though? If you understand what I mean.
No, everyone didn't.
Okay.
And if I am honest, I think yours was a bit marginal. So too close to call kind of thing. So you really need to find out what Miss Hyde has on the system for you.
Okay, and you saw the thing I was texting about the tutorials too, right? Where you saying that would add
I would
some
have
percentage.
added everything to it. So I wouldn't have left
Oh,
anything out of the final.
okay, okay, sir.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you then.
Yep. All right, I'm going to I see well three people. All right. I did not get a chance to get the complete list of the students that should be here now. But I think I'm gonna start because we can't keep waiting on people. All right, confirm that I'm being heard, please. Gallimore, Johnson, Gaylor, please
Yes,
confirm
sir.
you're hearing me.
We're hearing you, sir.
It's Gellier.
Come again?
It's Gellier.
Yeah, I was talking to Gallimore. So I have Gallimore, Johnson, Gallier. That's what I said, right? If I didn't, I'm sorry. I thought maybe I wasn't paying attention. It happens. So all right, guys. Let me start off by asking if y'all have downloaded the notes from Moodle. I'm going to assume everybody has gone to Moodle at least, right? So you have at least some idea as to what we should be doing today. Last week, Friday, I went through the syllabus with those who were here. And we spoke about the expectations for the course, right? As well as how the marks are going to be divided up, etc., etc. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start with anatomical positions and then move into tissues, right? So that is the plan for today. So give me a moment here. Let me grab my PowerPoint presentation and we can begin. Remember the PowerPoints will be on Moodle if you have not yet downloaded them. So give me a quick second, please. All right, so you should be seeing my screen now. You can let me know if you're not. All right, so let's begin, shall we? Oh, by the way, I should let you know that I believe we have class scheduled for 5 to 8. What I normally do is about 90 minutes in. I normally take about a 15-minute or so break because I do believe that 3 hours straight for a class is a bit much, right? So expect your break in an hour and a half, right?
He sees it there, but we're not allowed to talk about it.
I'm hearing noise if there's a question
Anyway,
or
I'm just gonna get myself shaving. When the day comes, I'm going to lecture.
anyway. Was there a question or do I continue? All right. No questions, so we'll start. Okay. First thing you need to know is what anatomy and physiology actually are, right? Because the course, of course, is going to require or anatomical and physiological examination of different aspects of the body. So therefore, you need to be able to define what anatomy and physiology are in general, right? And this is how we come to this. Anatomy in itself is essentially the science of structure. So it is essentially looking at the physical aspect of an organism, right? Or another way of putting it is looking at the gross aspect of things, right? Gross, of course, means general, right? And the relationships revealed by looking at its parts. So when you look at anatomy, you look at the bits and pieces, then you cut open the bits and pieces and see how they work together, right? Whereas physiology now is actually looking at the biochemical / biomechanical means by which the anatomy that you have cataloged functions, right? So fundamentally, anatomy is looking at the structure of an organism's various bits and pieces, and physiology is looking at the mechanisms that allow these bits and pieces to work properly, right? Hence, they are two separate things, right? So the body of a car would be its anatomy. The way it burns gasoline to produce motion would be physiology. If you think of it that way, right? Now, okay. Yeah. Next one. So physiology has many subdivisions, okay? Some of them we will be looking into, and others, well, you will look into all of them at some point in your career. But for our purposes, we're only interested in the physiology of cells, right? So we'll be looking at the basic functions of various types of cells in the body, right? Pathophysio is something that you'll do later on, as well as exercise physiology. We're mainly going to keep our interest on cell physiology, the systems physiology, so that's looking at like circulatory system, digestive system, how they work together, as well as the cardiovascular system physiology, etc. Right? We're also going to be looking at respiratory physiology, renal and reproductive physiology, and we will touch a little bit on the immunophysiology as well, right? Now, endocrinology, we'll see. I do believe we will also be doing that, right? So you can see we're touching on a lot of these. The neurophysiology, we're not to worry about that so much, right? So cells, endocrinology, cardiovascular physiology, immunophysiology, respiratory physiology, renal physiology, and reproductive physiology. We will touch on all of those in the course. We're also going to be looking at the skin, etc., right? Now, that said, the anatomy also has its own subdivisions, right? So, for example, we have surface anatomy, which is basically looking at epithelial layer. We'll be doing some of that, right? And the gross anatomy is looking at the basic structure. So, for example, when you look at bones and muscles and that make up the various organs. We'll be doing some of that. We'll also be looking at, as I mentioned before, systemic anatomy, how different systems work together. So for example, cardiovascular system would include your lungs as well as your heart and your blood vessels. We'll be examining all of those, right? We're not going to do a lot of embryology, a little bit in reproduction, but not very much, and no radiographic anatomy, right? You will do those things later on. Now, hopefully that makes you feel better, because that stuff is a pain in the butt. Now, what I have here in front of me is something that I'm assuming you already know, right? I'm assuming if I ask you to classify matter based on its complexity, or biological matter, I should say, based on its complexity, I'm assuming this is what comes to mind. So, of course, the basic structure of matter, would be the atoms. Pretty much everybody understands that, right? And an atom, of course, is the smallest particle of a substance that contains the properties of that substance, right? So obviously there are things that are smaller than atoms. Electrons and protons and neutrons are all subatomic particles, right? But if I take a carbon atom and I pull off the electrons do not have any of the properties of carbon, right? So that's what I'm referring to. Then now in your molecules now, you form molecules, of course, by joining atoms together, as everybody knows. So then, hence, molecules are more complex, therefore, than your simple atoms. Now, this is important in biology because it allows molecules to form the four major groups of what we call biologically important organic molecules, okay? Organic molecules that are required in order for life to be sustainable. For example, proteins are biologically extremely important. Besides water, which is not a biological material, right? So even though water is required for you to stay alive, it is not a biological material. Simply put, you can find water in places where there's no life. Hence, water is not, so hence life might need water, but water does not need life. That said, things like proteins are usually found associated with living things, at least on planet Earth, right? Now, proteins are made up of 20 amino acids, at least the ones found in life on planet Earth. And the combinations of these 20 amino acids will give you all the proteins in your body. Remember what I said to you? Proteins are the second most common substance in the body. Only water is more common. But proteins are the most diverse. There are far more different levels of different types of proteins than anything else, right? And I'm sure you all remember transcription and translation from last semester. So I don't need to run through that again, right? Then now we have carbohydrates. You all know CH2O, right? When you did chemistry and when you did some biochemistry. So you can break down the formula of a carbohydrate into CH2O. No matter how large the carbohydrate is, it fundamentally breaks down to that, CH2O. And you also know that carbohydrates in general are going to be made up of, well, I should say more complex carbohydrates. You know, your polysaccharides must be made up of monosaccharides or simple sugars. And you also know that most organisms, living organisms, use simple sugars as their primary mechanism for the production of ATP, primary substrate, I should say, right? Hopefully, so far, everything I'm saying to you sounds completely familiar, right? Then we have the third important biological material, which of course would be nucleic acids. And as I said to you, you all did transcription and translation and DNA replication already. So you know exactly what a nucleotide is. You know exactly what nucleic acids are, right? So we don't need to worry so much about that. And you all would have done lipids as well, right? So you already know with a fair amount of familiarity the four major types of biological biological molecules, right? So you use these biological molecules to produce, maintain your cells. And your cells now are the next level up. Right? So let's go again. You have atoms. Atoms form molecules, specifically the four types of biological molecule. Then these four types of biological molecule are required for the formation of cells. And cells are considered, of course, as you know, I'm sure, to be the smallest unit of life. What does that mean? Simply put, there's nothing that is considered alive that is smaller than a cell. Can any of you tell me, please, why viruses are not considered to be living things? Should know this one by now, right? Why are viruses not living things? Once I ask the question, I don't move forward until I get the answer. It means that the whole class is me sitting here staring in space, so be it. Right?
Because viruses are not made up of cells.
That doesn't tell me why they're not alive.
Cells are the smallest living thing.
Right, but what is it that the cells do that the viruses don't? That allows us to consider cells to be alive, but not viruses.
Viruses doesn't grow.
Hmm?
Viruses don't grow.
That's one of them. Absolutely, viruses do not grow. Right? So fundamentally, what I've essentially asked is, what are the aspects / characteristics of living organisms that a cell would have, but a virus would not, right? And as you rightly said, cells can grow, viruses cannot. Now, there are other things as well, and we'll look at them as we move along, right? So thanks for
Wait,
that.
sir, before we continue, can I try answering the question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it that they don't have like cytoplasm or organelles or a nucleus?
Technically, that is not one of the characteristics that are required for something to be alive, right? But you're right, they don't have cytoplasm per se, but they do have something similar to cytoplasm inside the viral capsule. So that's where that one's we're going to talk about the characteristics of life in like a minute, and then hopefully that will make more sense to you, right? But the cytoplasm is sort of involved. Well, all right, when I reach there, you'll see. All right, so the next one. Cells, of course, are required to make tissues. Tissue, of course, what is a tissue? A tissue is simply put a group of cells of the same type in the same location carrying out the same function, right? So for the most part, your tissues, all the tissue cells should be in the same place. If you find liver cells in the brain, they're in the wrong place, right? And chances are they're not a tissue, chances are they're a tumor, right? And also remember, they must be of the same type. Just because you have two types of cell that perform the same type of function, if they're not the same type of cell, they're not the same tissue, right? Then now organs are, of course, made up of tissues. And the thing with organs is because they are made up of different types of tissue, they're not stuck on a limited number of functions. So organs can generate many complex structures. They can perform many complex functions, right? So therefore, let's look at blood, for example. Blood is a tissue. Blood is a type of tissue called connective tissue. What is blood's function? Blood transports stuff, right? For the most part, that is what blood does. It transports. So it has a function, but the function is very simple. If I look, for example, instead now at the liver has over 2,000 different functions because the liver has many different tissues inside it. The liver produces hormones. The liver produces vitamins. The liver produces enzymes. The liver produces urea. All sorts of things are going on in the liver because it has these different tissues, all of them working together to make the liver the very important structure it is in the body, right? So complex structures with multiple tissues can be considered to be organs, right? Then now, of course, if you take your organs and you arrange them together so that they work together to perform a function, what you get now is an organ system, right? So for example, the one that I'm sure you've heard of the most, cardiovascular system. What is in the cardiovascular system? You have the heart, which is an organ. You have the lungs, which are organs, right? Even all of them work together, not just to move blood around the body, but also to transport white blood cells, help maintain blood pressure, all sorts of different things, right? Help to maintain the homeostatic set points within your body, right? All because they're working together. All right. Now, of course, once you pass organ, there's only one greater complexity to an organ system. Who knows what it is? The word is really related to organ. What is up from organ? Remember, the word is related to organ. Who can tell me? You are one of these things. The word organ is in it.
Organism.
Organism, yes. So organisms, like ourselves, complex organisms, are going to contain every level of complexity up to organism. And to the best of our knowledge, organisms are the greatest level of complexity, right? Though some people do argue, and you can take some with a grain of salt, that things like ant colonies are technically superorganisms, where each ant is like its own cell within the greater structure. But we can argue with that one, If that's the case, then political parties are also superorganisms, where everybody in here working together towards God he knows what. Anyway. So these are your levels of complexity, right? So if I ask you to describe level of complexity from simplest to the most complex, of course, that's what I'm looking for, right? All right. Let's move along. Let's talk now about something I'd mentioned earlier, which are the life processes. What things need to be done in order for a organism, or I should say organism, in order for something to be considered to be a living thing, right? Now, I'm sure you all know this already, but we still have to go through it, right? There are essentially 6, though in some books you'll see up to 9, what we call characteristics of life, right? 6 things that every living thing must do in order for it to be considered a living thing. So to start off, all living things must have a metabolism. That means that they must have a multiplicity of complex chemical reactions occurring inside them, which generate substances that help to keep them alive, right? So that's important. Then now, all living things must be responsive. Now, at CSEC, what term did they use instead of responsive? Who remembers it? Instead of saying, oh, the thing is responsive, you say it must have something or another. I'm assuming you all did that CSEC, right? You should have. What's another way of saying responsiveness? If you pick up something that changes easily, people say that you're very blank. What do they say? Really, guys? Y'all never heard of sensitivity? Did you do sensitivity at CSEC? Or irritability is another way of putting it. Right? So responsiveness is the same as sensitivity or irritability. Okay? So what is that? It is the ability to detect and respond to changes in the internal and external environments. Right? So something brush against your skin, you feel it. You ate something and it's causing gas to generate in your intestines, you can feel the gas, right? Then now we have movement. All living things have to be able to move. Now, if I say to you, hey, but if that is the case, does that mean that tree is not a living thing? All right? Let me ask, Robin, do you think a tree is a living thing?
Yes, sir.
Is a tree a living thing?
Yes, sir.
Why? How is it moving? What about the tree moves? You're
I don't
correct,
know.
but I just wanted to think about it. What about a tree can move for it to become a living thing? Considering that something must move, right?
Sir, like the stem of the tree that moves when it grows.
Right. That's one thing. It moves when it's growing, right? So for example, you see but trees and the branches are expanding and the leaves are growing and it's growing towards the sun, which means that it's actively moving in a direction. So I agree with you. Also, of course, the trees are going to move substances through their xylem and their phloem, right? So I 100% agree with that. All right. Now, next thing we have here now is growth, as you just mentioned, right? Trees grow, everything that is alive can grow. Even a cell, a single-celled organism, when it grows, it might not get extra cells, but its cell does increase in size, okay? So normally speaking, growth is an irreversible process. I said normally speaking because there are actually some organisms that can ungrow. Sounds weird, but here's what I'm saying. In human beings, for example, as we grow, we have an increase in the number of our cells, right? So when the cells replicate, that is growth for us. Now, obviously, when you get one cell and that one cell divides into two, and then those two cells divide into four, etc., you're dividing the size of the cell as you go along. So the cell gets smaller and smaller and smaller while it's actively dividing, right? But once you stop actively dividing, each individual tiny cell starts to grow. It starts to make organelles and absorb ATP and use the power and everything. And each individual cell gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you go from having one cell that's, let's say, 10 micrometers to having 20 cells that are all 10 micrometers. So there's a significant increase in size. And you cannot undo the change. You cannot go from 20 back to 1, right? You cannot undivide, right? So growth, permanent process for most organisms. Jellyfish are a bit different. Jellyfish are kind of weird. A jellyfish will go along, once it gets injured, it can actually go back into something of a pupal stage and then attach itself to a rock somewhere and start from scratch and make itself into a jellyfish again, right? Jellyfish are weird, weird, weird creatures, right? Since they are, to the best of our knowledge, they are functionally immortal organisms, right? Anytime they get too old, they just regenerate and move on back on with their life, right? We are not jellyfish. So, yeah. Differentiation is another one. Differentiation basically means you're taking cells that have no special functions, and through the magic of biology, you produce a cell with a specialized function. Right? This might take many different stages to occur, but it happens, right? So, for example, you have cells in your bone marrow called erythroblasts, and these erythroblasts end up making your red blood cells, right? And you even have cells called hematocytoblasts, which we'll look at later. Hemato, of course, means blood. And these hematocytoblasts will turn into all the blood cells in the body, right? They'll make the erythroblasts that will make the red blood cells. They'll make the cells that make the lymphocytes and all the other cells, right? And they do this by differentiation. Sperm comes from a cell that looks nothing like a sperm. So it just looks like a normal round cell. And because of differentiation, that regular looking cell changes to give it the characteristics of the sperm cell, right? And of course, all organisms can reproduce. In order for you to be a living thing, you're expected to be able to reproduce. Now, this is kind of a funny one, right? So I'm going to ask you, if you are born sterile, right? Let's say you're born and all the eggs in your ovaries are damaged and inoperable. Or you're born and your testicles are non-functional and they produce no sperm. Are you still a living thing? What do you think, Alexia? Are you still a living thing?
Yes, sir.
But you can't reproduce, so how are you alive? It just says right here, reproduction is required, right? So how are you alive? What do you think? And let me throw that open to everybody. How can you lack the ability to reproduce and still be alive?
Just because someone can't just because someone can't reproduce, they still have other characteristics of
But in order
being
for you to be
alive.
alive, you have to have all of them.
Oh,
Here's the thing. Yeah.
Sorry. You can have the facilities to reproduce, but it doesn't work.
Here's
Does that
this
make
is an
sense?
interesting point here, right? It is one of these things that comes up every now and then in debates. See if this makes sense to you. The living things are of the characteristic to reproduce, right? In general, they will have the ability to reproduce. And if one of them is born without that ability to reproduce, it doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden not a living thing. It simply means that they're a living thing that has been damaged, right? So therefore, if one human being can't reproduce, it doesn't change the fact that for the most part, human beings can reproduce. If that makes sense to you, right? So something happening to a couple of organisms does not change what is true for the vast majority of organisms. Therefore, you do not kick them out of the being alive. Right? It's just like a couple of years back when there was this big debate in the US about how to define the term woman, because they wanted trans women to be women. And one of the arguments was that a trans woman can't reproduce. And of course, the trans activists came back and said, well, not all women can reproduce. So therefore, a trans woman, which of course is a man address, can still be a woman, right? And the kickback to that was, guess what? These women may not be able to reproduce, but most of them are born with the structural capacity to reproduce, even if it is non-functional. So if a woman is born sterile, she still has a womb, she still has a uterus. It's not her fault that they don't function properly. If that makes sense to you, right? So even if you can't reproduce individually, living things on a whole can. Therefore, the ability to reproduce is a function of living things. All right. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Now, it is also important that living things be able to control, to at least some extent, the internal and external environmental conditions, right? Living things need to have homeostasis. They need to be able to ensure that they don't get too hot, they don't get too cold, there is not too much acid in the body, there is not too much base, not too much salt, etc., right? So human beings, as well as other living things, must be able to generate a Goldilocks zone. Y'all know what the term Goldilocks zone means? Remember that story, Goldilocks and the Three Bears? You know, one bed is too hard, one is too soft, one is just right. So homeostasis allows you to say, okay, and this part is too hot or this part is too cold. We need to do something to make it just right. So therefore, when your body gets hot, you sweat, try and bring your temperature down. When your body gets cold, you shiver, try and bring your temperature back up. That is homeostasis. That is trying to maintain your body in the Goldilocks zone, right? Now, homeostasis, of course, is going to involve two main systems, which are your nervous system and your endocrine system, right? Both of which we will be covering in a fair amount of detail. This semester it is the nervous system, it's the endocrine system I think we're doing. Next is going to be the nervous system, right? All right, so now we've covered all the stuff that I'm sure you all knew from CSEC. Let's start talking about stuff that you might not know from CSEC. Firstly, when we are examining the anatomy of a human being, we have to set up what amounts to a baseline, okay? The purpose of the baseline is to give everybody who's studying anatomy the same starting point, right? So for example, when you're describing different things on the body, everybody needs to know how to find what you're describing. So that is the purpose of the anatomical position. It allows everybody who's studying anatomy to have the same starting off point, okay? Why is this important? Well, let's say, for example, I say, boy, eyebrows, right? You will find your eyebrows above your eyes, right? Near the ventral surface of the body. So obviously you say, okay, here, above the eyes, ventral surface, there are the eyebrows, okay? But what if I took this person and I turn them upside down? If I turn them upside down, all of a sudden the eyebrows are now below the eyes. Does that mean that my original description is wrong? And the answer to that, of course, is no. And the reason that for that is this, the anatomical position. Anytime you're describing some part of the body, its position or size or whatever it is, you always have to assume that the body that you're describing is in this position. This is the anatomical position, right? So that is why I can say, hey, the nipples are above the abdomen. If the person was lying on their side, it wouldn't matter. Because when I'm making an estimation, I have to assume that they're standing like this, right? All right. Remember, as I'm going along, if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense to you, please let me know immediately, right? Then now you have the description of the anatomical position. See if this makes sense to you. You have to imagine the person facing forward. Their head is level, so they're looking straight ahead and looking up or down, looking straight. Their eyes are facing forward because they're looking straight. Eyes facing forward. Their feet have to be flat to the ground, right? Normally, the feet make a V shape, right? Their arms are down at their sides with their palms turned forward. And this is your anatomical position. If I ask you to describe the anatomical position, this is what I'm expecting you to tell me, right? Because I can ask you, hey, how do we know how somebody's, that the eyebrows are anterior or above the eye, or the nose is above the mouth? You must tell me that they're in the anatomical position. That's how we assume these things. And then I will say to you, okay, what is the anatomical position? And then you need to be able to rattle this off, right? And remember, from this point on, no matter what orientation I give you a specimen in, an organism in, if I took this image and I turned it sideways, then I ask you to describe the position of the left eyebrow in comparison to the left eye. Right? You shouldn't tell me about the left eyebrow is sideways. You always assume this position. Now, with that said, we're going to now look at some anatomical terms, okay? So as we were mentioning earlier about describing various parts of the body, we're on the position of these parts. That is what we're going to do now. So let's start here. If you're lying down, if you're lying down, face down. I know some people sleep face down. If I remember correctly, around 30% of people sleep on their belly, right? Would it surprise you to know that the vast majority of people sleep on their back? So back and belly are the two most common, with people who sleep on their side is about 15%, right? So most people sleep on their back. But if you sleep on your belly, or you're lying down on your belly, we call that the prone position, right? So belly down, you are prone. If you're lying on your back, on the other hand, we say that you are supine. So belly down is prone, on the back, supine. Now, obviously, prone and supine are essentially opposite terms. You can't be prone and supine at the same time, obviously, right? Another pair of terms is going to be anterior and posterior. When I say something is anterior, I mean it's more towards the front of your body, okay? So if you can see the person's face or chest, that is going to be the anterior of the body. Now keep in mind that it is not necessarily going to hold for all animals. If you think about it, where's a dog's chest? A dog's chest is not pointing towards the front of the animal. A dog's chest is pointing towards the ground, right? So for humans, anterior and ventral will be the same term. Then now, the opposite term to this one is going to be posterior. So if anterior is the front, posterior is going to be the back, right? By the way, please do not use front and back when you're writing answers to questions. We expect you to use the correct anatomical terms, okay? So I do expect anterior, posterior. If you write back and front, you will get no marks for it, right? So remember now, posterior is the dorsal aspect, right? So that's the back of the body, but you won't write back. Please remember that, right? So far you notice that we've been using paired, what we call paired terms. The reason the terms are paired because using one will exclude the other. So if I say something is anterior, it can't also be posterior in the same sentence, right? So if I say to you, hey, your nose is anterior to your ears, what am I saying? I'm saying your nose is closer to the front than your ears. You can't, right? Therefore, if the nose is anterior to the ears, the nose cannot be posterior to the ears as well. You can only use one of the two terms, right? As I said, so far we've been using two terms apiece. Now, this one here, there are three of them. This is now looking at the axilla. The axilla, of course, is the side of the body. If you're near the front or the anterior of the side, sounds weird when I say it, anterior of the side, we call that the anterior axillary line, right? So you can touch the side of your body near the anterior part. That's your anterior axillary. The mid-axillary line is right about where your armpit is. Mid, of course, because it's roughly in the middle. And the posterior axillary line is towards the shoulder blade and back. Now, why do we need these terms? Why can't I just say side, middle, and back? I mean, why is it necessary to learn all of these new things? It's not like nonsense. Here's the thing. As doctors, you need to have your own language, essentially. You cannot use colloquial terms because colloquial terms, their actual meaning can change over time, right? People can change their minds about things. And you can't have things that will change like that. For example, if I say to you, what color is the color associated with girls, what would you tell me? What's the color associated with girls?
Pink,
And the one with boys?
blue,
Okay. Do you know that up until the mid 1800s, pink was a masculine color? Up to that point, pink, because pink was the color of dilute blood. So men would happily wear pink all day because it was masculine. And blue was supposed to be a calming color. So it was associated with women. And then after the mid 1800s, the things changed, and all of a sudden pink became a feminine color and blue became a masculine color. Right? So the society just changed their mind. Science cannot allow people just to change their mind like that. So we cannot use social terms. We have to use medical terms because for the most part, those either don't change or they change very, very slowly, right? So keep that in mind for me, right? So you're asking yourself, why do I have to learn all these funny terms? Why can't I just use the terms we've always been using? That is one of the reasons. These terms don't change, right? I mean, even in my lifetime, gay. When I was growing up, if somebody told you you were gay, that's a good thing. Hey, you're gay, it means you're happy. Now anybody tell us again, the last thing comes to mind is happiness, isn't it? Right? So language can change, but the scientific language is not supposed to change. Right. Now that I've explained to you why you need to use different terms from the ones I'm sure you're familiar with, let's explain why you need the terms to begin with. Let's say, for example, somebody comes into the emergency room. They have been shot, okay? The bullet has passed through this position here, right? So here's the bullet, where the bullet is lodged. Now, patient has rolled in, right? The ambulance people, the paramedics jump up to the doctor and say, hey, doctor, this person was shot in the side, near the top. Side near the top is all of this, right? The wound is bandaged, is bleeding all over the place. The doctor now has to spend time figuring out where this wound is. All he knows is at the top near the side. But instead, if the ambulance, if the paramedic says to you, doctor, the patient has been shot midway between the anterior and mid-axillary line, and the bullet is lateral to the left nipple, the doctor knows exactly where to look, right? He knows exactly where to look. And not only does he know exactly where to look, the doctor now knows which organs that bullet might have hit on its way in. So just by being able to tell with a greater efficiency where a wound is, the doctor can assess the seriousness of the patient's condition, right? So yes, you need to learn the terms, and yes, they're important, especially for those who want to become medical doctors, right? All right, so remember, anterior axillary near the front, right? Oh, mid-axillary near the middle, and posterior axillary near the back of the side of the body, right? Then now we also have these terms superior and inferior. Now these are terms I'm sure you're very much familiar with. So if I say superiority, most of you should have an idea as to what I mean. Superior means above, right? On top. So when somebody feels that they're superior to you, they feel like they're above you, right? So it should make perfect sense to you that something on the body that is superior must be above something that is not superior. Or in this case here, if you're below the superior, you are, of course, an inferior, right? So for example, if I wanted to compare the position of your forehead to your liver, why not? Forehead to liver, I can easily say your forehead is superior to your liver. I can say your forehead is superior to your nose, superior to your eyebrow. Well, is it? Yeah, superior to your eyebrows. So it gives me an idea as to where on the body to look for this mysterious forehead, right? Then now, we have distal and proximal. When you hear the term distal, I want you to think of distance, okay? So something distal is further away. It's a longer distance. And proximal is like proximity. Right? Y'all know, for example, I'm assuming at least one of you in here has played video games before. So you know about things like proximity mines and those kind of things. You get too close to them, they explode. So so remember now, distal is distance, how far away something is, and proximal is proximity, how close something is to you. Now, we generally speaking use the terms distal and proximal to describe structures on your limbs. So your arms and your legs. You don't normally use distal and proximal when describing things on your chest or your abdomen or your head. What we usually do is we compare the position of the things we're describing to what we call the point of origin, right? The point of origin is where the limb attaches to the body. So let's take your legs, for example. Your legs are going to go up to the thighs, and the thighs are going to connect into the pelvis, right? So the lower limb connects to the pelvis. So if I know that, I know the closer something is to that pelvis, the more proximal it is. So if I say, boy, I want to describe the position of the left knee to the position of the left ankle, I can therefore say the left knee is proximal in comparison to the left ankle. The left knee is therefore closer to where the limb joins the body, right? So proximal, distal, we use them for the limbs. Distal, how far away from you to where the body attaches to the limb. Proximal, how close are you to where the body attaches to the limb, right? Now, we also have these two terms that are used now, not for the limbs, but for the torso. So, head, neck, chest, abdomen, pelvis, we can use the terms lateral and medial. Lateral and medial. Lateral means closer to the midline of the body, or closer to the middle of the body. And, sorry, lateral means further away from the midline of the body. Whereas medial means closer. So lateral, further away from the midline of the body. Medial means closer to the midline. What do I mean by midline of the body? Can I assume everybody knows that human beings are bilaterally symmetrical? Alea, do you know what bilateral symmetry means?
No, sir, that's my first time hearing about it.
All right. So once you hear bi, of course, bi means two, right? And lateral is referring to a horizontal spacing, right? So bilateral, so two, and it's horizontal. And we have symmetry, which means equality, right? So in human beings, what we call bilaterally symmetrical. By that I mean, if I draw a line to the middle of the forehead, assuming my line is straight, and go straight down through the nose, through the lips, all the way down to the little peepee there, I can cut the human body into two mirrored halves. So basically, whatever is on the left side is on the right side as well. That is why we say it's bilaterally symmetrical, right? You match on both sides. And of course, this is not like 100% accurate, because there are certain things that are not going to be fully bilaterally symmetrical. For example, do you know, and I'm assuming you do, that women usually have one breast that is larger than the other? Does anybody know which breast is normally larger, the left or the right? Chances are you all have this going on right now, right? Which one of them is bigger?
Sir, is it the left?
Normally the right one is bigger, right? It's just like the testicles. The testicles are also not bilaterally symmetrical. Normally the right one hangs lower than the left one, right? Also, when you cut the heart with this line, the two halves of the two parts of the heart are also not going to be symmetrical, right? So the bilateral symmetry is not perfect in people. As a matter of fact, human beings are very, very sensitive to the symmetry of the face in particular, right? One of the main things that people, and this is males and females, it doesn't matter, find attractive about somebody's face is the symmetry of the face. They actually did a study, well, several studies now, where they basically took a bunch of pictures of pretty people or people that they considered pretty. Well, all right, let me see if this makes sense to you. They took a bunch of pictures and they carried them to colleges all over the United States. And they showed people the pictures and said, hey, rate these people from 1 to 10. You know, the normal thing, right? And what they realized is that if you take the image of the face and you measure one side of the face against the other side of the face, the prettier and on average, you know, that somebody is, the more symmetrical both halves of their face will tend to be. So the position of the eyebrows left and right will be the same. Position of the eyes will be the same. Cheekbones, everything, right? The more your features are asymmetrical, right? The more out of line they are, the less attractive people will tend to find you. Obviously, there are extremes, you know. You have a very, very symmetrical face, and you know, your cheeks are like 15 times bigger than normal. Ain't nobody gonna find that attractive. But for the most part, if you look at yourself in the mirror, the more symmetrical your features are, the more attractive the average person will find you. Have you guys ever heard of that before? I'm assuming you have. Nobody's ever heard that before, really? Now,
Yes, I've heard of it.
and keep in mind, this holds some males and females, right? So a symmetrical masculine face is still going to be attractive to females. And the thing is, humans are extremely good at picking up asymmetry in facial features. Not so great with the rest of the body, but with the face, we're extremely good at it, right? Sometimes we're so good at it, or we can subconsciously pick up differences of millimeters in somebody's features. You ever look at somebody and you don't know why you don't think they're good looking? You just look at their face and like, boy, why is this person not pretty? Or why is this man not handsome? You know, they're almost there, but there's just something about them I can't quite put my finger on that they don't reach. More likely than not, you have spotted some sort of asymmetry in their features. And even if your mind can't articulate it, your subconscious has picked it up as a no, man. You know, the eyebrows are a little too close to the nose, or the left eye is a little higher than the right eye. Even if you don't notice it consciously, your brain is constantly taking pictures like this of people's faces and analyzing them for you. Right? And why are you going through all of this problem? Here's the thing. For the most part, and obviously there are always exceptions, right? But for the most part, the more symmetrical a person's face is, the healthier they tend to be. It's one of these weird things. If your face is nice and symmetrical and your features are the proper distance apart, automatically you look healthier. All right? So obviously if a man is looking for a female to bear his children, or a female is looking for a male to father the children, the healthier the other person is, the better off they are, right? So the symmetry is extremely important, even to us. Even if you don't think about it, and your mind is always working with symmetry. So that is why the bilateral symmetry is important. Right? Whatever is on the left side, we expect to see on the right side, and roughly in the same place. If one person has a shoulder that is an inch or two shorter than the shoulder on the other side, you're going to notice immediately. And the person looks kind of lopsided. And once you look lopsided, you automatically, you mentally, I'm not saying you're doing it on purpose, but mentally you're going to drop their grade on their looks down. Right? All right. So that's the importance of symmetry. So the medial and lateral now. So remember now, when I drew that line on the middle of the face to get for the bilateral symmetry, I said to you, medial means closer to that middle line, whereas lateral means further away from that middle line, okay? So medial. So something medial must be closer to the center of the body. Something lateral must be further away, right? So this is just showing some nerves in the eyeball. Lateral rectus and medial longitudinal fasciculus, right? These are nerves. I'll give you some more examples later. Now, these two terms here are almost in opposition to the whole bilateral symmetry thing, but it's not really opposition, right? Remember I said that human beings are not perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, right? Particularly under the skin. So because of that now, we can have terms like this: contralateral and ipsilateral. Let's start with the contra. Contra as in contrary. And if something is contrary, of course, it means it's going against something else, right? In this case here, it's across from. So contralateral means that you're on opposite sides of the body. You know? Just like if you're on opposite sides of an argument. Yeah. So your left eye and your right eye are going to be contralateral. They're going to be on opposite sides of the body. And they're roughly in the same place, right? Whereas if you're ipsilateral, you're going to be on the same side of the body. So for example, your left leg and your right leg are going to be ipsilateral. So contralateral, opposite sides of the body, ipsilateral, same side of the body, right? So if we look here, we can see, wait, what is this? Oh, this is the looks like the abdominal aorta. And this here looks like a uterine artery. And this here looks like inguinal artery. So these two arteries here are going to be ipsilateral because they're both on the same side of the body. Whereas this artery, which is the uterine artery, and this one here are contralateral. They're on opposite sides of the body, right? Now, once again, I hear, they're contralateral. One nose hole here, here's the next one. They're contralateral. Why are they contralateral? Because remember, the line running through the middle separates these two, right? Whereas this eyebrow and this eye are ipsilateral. Now we also have this other pair of terms here referred to as superficial and deep. Now maybe you've used these terms before, so you should have some idea as to what they mean, right? So normally when people talk about superficial, it's not usually a good thing, right? So normally if somebody says, boy, you're very superficial, it's usually an insult. So something superficial tends to be, as we say, near the skin, right? It's only surface deep. Usually when somebody says you're superficial, it means that you're either a fool or an idiot. And there are, yeah, you know, there can be a difference between being a fool and an idiot, right? You know, somebody says, boy, you know, I don't like talk to this person. They're very, very superficial. They never seem to get the deeper meaning of the argument, right? It's like talking to a 5-year-old. You know, that makes sense, right? So very near the surface, no deep understanding. That's superficial. So simply put, in anatomical terms, superficial, the closer something is to the skin, the more superficial it is. And of course, that means, to the contrary, deep now is the further away from the skin something else is, the deeper it is, right? So closer to the skin, superficial, further from the skin, deep, right? Let's continue. Now, what I want to do before I move on to let's do the planes first. So in addition to being able to describe the positions of things on the body relative to each other, you also need to know about the ways in which we can cut the body, right? How we can determine what we call the planes. There are 3 main planes. We have what is called the coronal plane, the sagittal plane, and transverse planes. Okay? Coronal, sagittal, transverse. So let's describe what we're talking about. If you took a knife or a bandsaw or something and you cut the body and you pass the saw through both ears on the skull on the way down, splitting the whole body in two, you would end up, of course, with a front part and a back part, or as we say, an anterior or ventral part versus a posterior or dorsal part. So you're cutting the body into anterior and posterior. We call this a coronal plane, right? Or a coronal cut. So if you get front and back, that's coronal, right? But instead, if you cut the body so that you get 2 parts, a left part and a right part, that is what we call the sagittal cut. Now remember, sagittal, you don't have to cut the person into 2 equal halves for the bilateral symmetry. You just have to be cutting 2 left and get yourself a left and a right part. If you happen to cut the person and I actually get a perfect cut, cutting them into 2 equal parts, we call this now a median cut. So here's a sagittal plane. So if you cut them and you get 2 nice even halves, that is median, right? We also call it mid-sagittal, okay? So remember now, if you're cutting to give left and right, that is sagittal. If you cut to give left and right equal parts, that is a median cut or a mid-sagittal cut, right? You can, of course, also cut the body into top and bottom parts. If you do so, the upper part will be the superior part, because remember, superior means above, and the lower part will, of course, be your inferior part. So if your cut gives you superior and inferior, that is a transverse cut, right? So sagittal, left and right, coronal, back and front, transverse, top and bottom. That's how we cut, okay? All right. Now let us look, let me ask you a couple of questions with what we've done so far to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I want you to look at I think I have a better image. Give me a second. This one I have a better one of these. All right, let's use this one. Let's use this body here. Now, if I asked you to describe the position of this person's left nipple and compare the left nipple position to the position of the right clavicle, and I asked you to use multiple anatomical terms, could you do something like this based on what I just told you? Let's start there. So let's find out. Jidan, can you give me a term that can describe the relative position of these two structures based on one of those that we just went through?
Sir, the terms haven't cemented in my head yet. I couldn't tell you right now.
No, man, you need to be following along, right? You're supposed to have the notes.
I'm
You're supposed to be taking notes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just listening and screen recording and watching it over. So that's what I usually do.
No, man,
But I'm keeping up. I'm listening to what you're saying.
but are you understanding though?
I'm trying to understand.
All right, let's be simple. If I pass a line through this fellow here, would these two structures be on the same side of the body?
No, sir.
All right. So we can therefore say if they're on opposite sides of the body, that automatically we can use the term contralateral, right? They're in opposition. What about the height of those two structures? Are they at the same height?
No, sir.
So which one would be, well, so what term can I use then when I'm talking about the height?
Superior.
Right, so I can say that the clavicle is superior to my what was it, left nipple, right? So all of a sudden we've gone two terms already, right?
Yes, sir.
It's about how close you are to the middle. Are both of them the same distance away from the middle?
No, sir.
Which one would be closer to the middle?
The left nipple.
You sure about that?
No, the clavicle.
Because remember, the clavicular bone starts at about here.
Yes, sir.
So that means, of course, that we can see that the clavicle is more medial in comparison to the left nipple, right? So just by that, we have three ways to compare the position of these two structures. So if I had to describe to somebody where to find one of these relative to the other one, we don't have 3 points of comparison already, right? This is the kind of thing that I need y'all to be able to do, right? So you need to make sure you study the terms. So when I say medial and lateral and proximal and all of these things, you know exactly what I'm going on about, right? Now, that said, I'm going to give you all a moment to look at the terms. I realize these days people don't take notes, right? It's actually not a very good practice. For a very simple reason. The human brain is not designed to process large quantities of information at one given time. The process of writing notes helps to cement the information in the subconscious mind, which makes it easier to transfer to your conscious mind later. If you're just listening to me talk, but you're not writing things down, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? And unfortunately, that is one of the problems with this internet thing. Everybody assumes that, there's a recording somewhere. Remember, the school does not provide recordings. right? So you need to make your own notes. Anyway, so this lovely slide here summarizes most of what we just went through, okay? Now, I didn't really mention the intermediate one here. And intermediate, of course, is between the medial and lateral structures. Now, we're not going to use this one very much, but do be aware of its existence, right? Now, this continues. Now, these two here, I have not touched on. So I'm going to do so now. Because these are ones that are going to come up over and over again as we go along, right? Parietal and visceral. Generally speaking, they're referring to membranes that are going to either wrap around an organ or are going to line the cavity an organ sits in, okay? For the most part, visceral refers to on the organ itself. So if something is touching an organ, that thing is visceral. Now, pretty much all of your organs have a visceral covering. I don't know if any of you in here can cook. When I was growing up, everybody from the age of 10 straight up can cook. These days, I don't know. It seems to be more and more a lost art, which is sad. If you've ever cooked, if you've ever prepared food, if you've ever had to peel liver or kidney or something like that, you know that organs have this little white layer or translucent layer over them that you have to peel off. This layer that you peel off is the visceral covering of the organ. It's a protective layer. It stops the organ from getting any significant damage, right? Now, in addition to this layer, you also have the layer lining the inside of the cavity. Whether it's the chest cavity or abdominal cavity, you're always going to have a layer lining the cavity, which is also there to reduce damage. And we call that lining layer in the cavity the parietal layer. So therefore, you're always going to have between organs at least two layers. The one that is directly touching the organ, which is the visceral, and the layer that lines the chambered organ sits in, which is the parietal. So please remember, parietal, visceral. We did planes already. This is just the description of the planes. Now, you guys are going to have to learn also about subdivisions, right? So let's take body cavities. I just mentioned to you about parietal and visceral membranes and how the parietal membranes line body cavities, right? So no surprise, we have to talk about body cavities. There are quite a few cavities in the human body. But the largest cavity is probably the abdominal pelvic cavity. Abdominal pelvic cavity is a combination of the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. Hence, abdominal pelvic. I mean, it's kind of obvious in the name, right? Now, your abdominal pelvic cavity is going to contain reproductive organs as well as, of course, your digestive organs. And no surprise, there's plenty in there that can go wrong, right? There are lots of organs in there to get disease. So you need to be able to identify the positions of these organs so that you can be used as a mechanism of helping to diagnose disease, right? So let's start out the nice simple way. We can divide the abdominal pelvic region into what we call quadrants, right? Now, hopefully, once you see the term quad, Once you see quad, the term quadrant should make sense to you, right? So quad, of course, means 4. So therefore, abdominal pelvic quadrants, you must have 4 of them. So simply put, you divide the abdomen into 4 approximately equal sections. I say approximately because things are never really perfectly equal in a body, right? Now, you're going to need to learn the names of your quadrants. Luckily, they're really easy to remember. So we have the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant. So if you remember upper and lower, just remember right and left and you're gone clear, right? Here's what you're going to need to do for me. There's, as I said to you, there are going to be specific organs and sections of organs found in the different quadrants. So here is a list of some of them. Now, let me explain why this is important. Once again, this is very, very important in the diagnosing of disease, right? Somebody comes to a physician, and what they do, they come and say, boy, doctor, I have a bellyache. What is a belly? Think about it, try and think about it from a medical perspective. Somebody tells you they have a belly ache. What is aching? The belly? A doctor can't operate on a belly. What is that? A doctor needs to be able to isolate the organs that are potentially causing the problem or having the problem caused to them, right? So if the patient, that's why let's say, for example, they say, oh, you have a bellyache, what does the doctor normally ask? Patient lies down flat on the back, they lift the patient's shirt, and the doctor starts palpating, start pressing down on different parts of the abdominal pelvic quadrant. And they say, do you feel anything here? They move on a little bit. Do you feel anything here? And the reason that they're moving down slowly is because it allows them to pinpoint where the distress is coming from. So, for example, you have the liver in the right upper quadrant, right? The liver, of course, will be in the upper part of the right upper quadrant. So here's the liver up here, so. So as the doctor is palpating, say, oh boy, the pain is right here, so. Right? Just below the rib cage or near the rib cage. Then the doctor can say, okay, what is below the rib cage in this area? Oh, that's the liver. I wonder if something is wrong with the liver. You understand? So being able to determine where the pain is coming from and knowing what is present in this area is very important for, once again, diagnosing a disease, right? So that is why you're going to have to learn this here, okay? So if I ask at any time, hey, which quadrant do you find the left over in? You know, where is the spleen located? You need to be able to tell me the information from this table here, okay? And almost certainly questions will be coming from here. All right. Now, in addition to quadrants, we can also divide the abdominal pelvic cavity into regions. And the regions are smaller than quadrants because it allows you now to help zero in now on what the problems are, right? So you had 4 quadrants, but you're going to have 9 regions, okay? Now, luckily, the names of the regions are somewhat repetitive, so it's not as hard to remember as it might appear initially. So here are our regions. We have the epigastric region. Now, epi is above or around. And gastric, of course, is referring to the stomach. So you're expecting at least a portion of the upper part of the stomach to be in this region here, right? So epigastric, stomach. To the right side of the epigastric, you have what is called the hypochondriac region. You have the right hypochondriac and you have the left hypochondriac. Now, does anybody know what the term hypochondriac mean? Have you ever heard that term before? It's a term that pops up every now and then on social media. Normally somebody's being called the hypochondriac. And have you ever heard that term before?
Something to do with anxiety?
Anxiety over something, yes. Hypochondriacs normally have extreme anxiety with regards to illness. And because of that, they tend to think that they're ill all the time. So if you know somebody who, boy, they always like, oh, I'm sick. I think I'm sick. I think I'm sick. I feel a cold coming on, you know? People like that are called hypochondriacs because they're constantly feeling some pain or something and thinking they have cancer or whatever it is, right? Now, so we have the right and left hypochondriac region. Now, why are these regions the hypochondriac region? Well, it's because a lot of shadow pain comes from these regions here. Because the liver is there, the stomach is there. You get a little gas, your stomach full up. All of a sudden you think you're dying because you get a little pain in the upper abdomen, right? So hypochondriac region for that reason. Remember, left and right. Now, below the epigastric, you're going to have the umbilical region. And I hope you all have figured this out, but let me ask. Why do you think they call this one the umbilical region? What makes it umbilical? Robin, what do you think?
Sir,
Sir, she
Yeah,
went
you're not
to use the
Robin. Neither one of
bathroom.
these Robin. Robin, what do you think?
she said she went to the bathroom, sir.
Come again? I didn't catch that.
She texted me and said she went to the bathroom. So if you call her name, I should tell you.
Uh-huh. All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Alia, what about you?
I would assume it's because that's where the umbilical cord was.
Okay, but how do you know where the umbilical cord was?
Because it was attached to your navel.
Exactly. So it's the umbilical region because that's where the navel is. And the navel, of course, is the point of attachment where your umbilical cord would have been. So you're absolutely right, right? And of course, I think everybody knows that all mammals have a navel, right? Well, not all, most.
Yes, sir.
Some very, very simple, like monotremes, like a platypus and a spiny anteater, they don't have umbilical cords. Neither do I don't think the marsupial ones have them either. They're like kangaroos and those guys. But pretty much everybody else has them, right? All right. So that's the umbilical region. Then now on either side, we have the right lumbar and left lumbar region. What is in this area that makes this region a lumbar region? What else lumbar have you heard of during your lifetime? None of you have ever heard the term lumbar before?
Oh, sir. Well, I can't remember. I feel like it's something pertaining to lumber, as in.
Lumbar is for lower back. So that's where your lumbar vertebrae are. So your lower back is your lumbar region. Right? I know it kind of does sound like lumbar now as I think about it. Never really thought about that before. But it is because of your lower back. Right? So your vertebra or your lumbar vertebra are in this area here. And the lumbar vertebra support pretty much your torso. So it's very important, right? So normally when you get a lower back pain, the back pain is in your lumbar region. Then now, below the umbilical, you also have what we call a hypogastric region. The hypogastric region now, so hypo, of course, is going to now mean below the gastric, right? So no part of the stomach is in the hypogastric region. It is also known as the pubic region, obviously because your pubic bone is in this region as well, okay? Now, you're also supposed to have your reproductive organs in this region. Now, on either side of this, you're going to have the right and left inguinal region. It's right here. That is because running through this region, sorry, you have a big artery called the inguinal artery, which carries blood down to your legs and thigh, right? If you ever heard of people getting shot in the leg and dying, and so how you get shot in the leg and dead? It's because of this artery. If you damage this artery, you bleed profusely, right? And because of how close the artery is to the joint, you basically cannot get a tourniquet over this, right? So if somebody gets stabbed or shot in this region here, it is damn near impossible to stop the bleeding. The blood comes spurting out, and they're usually dead within 3 minutes. Right? That's why sometimes people get in a knife fight and they stab try to stab each other in the leg, and then one of them dies. It's because of the bleeding from the inguinal region, because you've severed the inguinal artery, right? And so literally minutes is all it takes to kill you. All right, so now we have our 9 regions. So please remember the 9 regions, right? Also, no surprise, I'm sure, I'm expecting you to know the organs in the 9 regions. You can see that some of them are labeled here. All right. Now, here's some more new information for you. I know there's plenty of new information, but you'll find that it's gonna happen a lot, right? This here is looking at the names of some body parts, okay? Now, I'm sure you're familiar with all the body parts that are labeled here, even if you're not familiar with the names. Now, once again, why can't we just name the thing like everybody else named them? Why is the head called the cephalic? Why is the forehead the frontal? Why we can't just use head and forehead like every other person on the planet? Why do medical doctors and anatomists have to use these funny terms? Because once again, these medical terms do not change over time. They're stable. You don't have to worry about them. 1 minute is a head and next minute is something else 10 years from now. Not only that, since we're all learning the same terminology, right? Even if I don't know what head is in French, the French doctor will still know cephalic, right? Even if I don't know what the name of the chin is in German, the German doctor will still know chin as mental. So even between languages, a lot of medical terminology is interchangeable. So the language itself will not stop it from being understood, right? So hence, you need to learn the terms. They're simply for communication purposes. And another reason, of course, is that when you're talking to somebody who claims to be a medical doctor and you start throwing out the fancy lingo, if they don't understand what you're talking about, you already know that they don't belong around you, right? So the language is also a way of ensuring that you're talking to the right kind of people. You know? Now, that's it. Let's talk about the different parts of the body based on the medical terminology. So remember I mentioned to you, cephalic is head. All right? And the forehead is called the frontal region. Just the same way the eye cavity is referred to as the orbit. Because the eyeball, of course, is a ball. It's like a planet, it's round too. Hence, it sits in the orbit. Now, this is the one that so seems a little funny. Yes, Alea.
No, sir. What is kaput? Because I thought kaput was also head.
I mean the back of the head. When we get to the
Okay,
rear part, we'll talk
thank
about the
you.
rear.
Okay, thank you.
Now, mental. Does anybody know why you'd call the chin mental? It sounds weird. Is it mental thinking? How the hell is the chin thinking? Chin can't think. There's this very famous statue called the thinking man, right? And sometimes we do it too as people. You ever deep in thought and your head feel heavy? What do? You lean your head on your hand, on your fist. And normally your fist is somewhere near your chin. So you're thinking heavy, your hand is on the desk, and you find you're just propping up your chin on the desk same time while you're having your deep thoughts. Hence, chin is mental, right? It's kind of a stupid reason, but you know, it's a nice story, it makes it easy to remember. So mental equals chin. Of course, genitalia are the reproductive organs. It's easy one to remember. The spell wrong should be patellar. So that should be an A here. That should be an E here. So it was a swap those around. So patellar. The patellar, of course, is referring to the little bone here on the front of the knee. So the patellar bone is kind of important because it sits above some very important ligaments. And if the ligaments get damaged, you will not be able to walk, right? That's why you need a bone there. Now, the chest. Now, running in the middle of the chest, you have what is called a sternal. Of course, we normally call it the sternum. But of course, normal people would have said the chest middle, right? Now, the sternal region here is important because your ribs attach to the sternum, right? And the ribs, of course, help to make up the anterior portion of the chest. We call the chest the pectoral region, right? Why do we call it pectoral region? Because of this big muscle in here called the pectoralis major. So, you know, when you see bodybuilders and they're doing their thing, lifting their things, and they say, oh, you know, they have very good pecs. That's the muscle they were talking about, the pectoralis major. And this is why the chest is called the pectoral region. You already know umbilical means navel, right? We mentioned inguinal already, but inguinal is also the groin region, right? Now, coxa refers to the hip bone. So coxal is hip, right? Now, you also have the shin, right? And that is referred to as the shin area, or the leg is referred to as the crural region, right? Now, here's something that I've always found interesting about Jamaican people. A Jamaican will look at all of this and say that is their leg, right? This is not no leg. What you're looking at here are distinct structures. You have the thigh up here, which is called the femoral region, by the way. You have the knee joint or the patellar joint. Then you have the lower leg finally, right? So technically speaking, the leg is only below the knee, right? None of the rest of this is leg. And as I said, I find Jamaican people make this mistake all the time. The next thing they will do is they will call the whole thing foot. I've come across people in my life, the boy, they hurt their foot last night. And I say, okay, show me which part it hurt. And they point to the knee. So the back side is your foot. You know, how is that your foot? But guess what? Everybody else say foot. You know, any part of the leg or thigh, foot. Right? So it's one of the things that medical doctors also have to deal with as well. So when they're communicating with patients, they can't just listen to what the patient say and take their word for it. Sometimes they have to say, you know what, show me exactly where. Right? The patient said, boy, I never pain in my belly. Where is that? Show me. You know? Never take a patient's opinion or a statement for granted. Always confirm. Because sometimes they're not lying to you, but they just simply don't know any better. Right? Then now we have the tarsal region, which is the instep. Right? There are several muscles here that can be strained or sprained. So if you've ever had like a bad sprain, sometimes you'll feel like ache across this region. Now the foot is referred to as the pedal or pedal. This is another funny one. It's called a pedal, right? When you're riding a bicycle, what do you put your foot on? The pedal. When you're driving a car, how do you press the brake? It's a brake pedal. So pedal and pedal, all of them involve the foot. You put your foot on the bicycle pedal, you put your foot on the car pedal. So then we say the foot is the pedal, right? Lots of pedals. Now the back, or I should say the dorsal region, we have the occipital being the back of the head. What was the term you used earlier? Somebody asked me about a term for the back of the head.
Kaput.
Right. Then now we have, oh cross is what just happened. One second, I'm not sure this happened. But remember though, right, we still need to know all these terms. Why isn't this coming up? Okay, I think that's it. Right, sorry. One second, I'm getting a funny thing here. Start over again, Lord. All right. One more time. Let's hope it works. Okay. Nothing seems to be moving, so let's hope for the best. Yeah, so as you rightly said, the term caput does also refer to the head, right? But for the most part, we were basing our definitions on our Western/European aspects of things when we use these terms because they're proper medical terms, right? We don't really use caput as a medical term. I think the Germans do, if I remember correctly, but they're crazy, so don't worry about that. Now, in addition to the back of the head being the occipital region, right? Now, I'll also mention that the occipital region of the brain is back here, which is the reason why this is the occipital, right? The shoulder point, you know, people always say shoulder point. This right here, so is called the acromial region. And the arm itself is called the brachial region. Okay? So the arm is brachial. Should mention at the front of the arm, the back of the arm is brachial, front is the antebrachial. The elbow is called the cubital region, right? That comes from the term cubit. A cubit is actually a unit of measurement used by the pharaohs in Egypt. This is what they used to build like the pyramids and stuff like that, right? So what they would do is this. When the pharaoh became an adult, they would take a piece of stick and they would measure from his funny bone, his elbow, all the way to the tip of their fingers. And then that would be 1 cubit. And for as long as the pharaoh was alive, that measurement would equal 1 cubit. It was kind of a stupid system because, of course, when the pharaoh died, you have to throw out all the old sticks and get brand new sticks, right? But this is where the term cubit comes from, because this is the elbow you would measure from when you're determining the cubit, right? So cubital equals elbow. And this region here between, of course, the buttocks is the sacral region because of sacrum. And the sacrum, of course, is a part of your spinal cord, right? The vertebral column, I should say. And then you have this little region here between the anus and the testicles or vagina, depending on which one you're rocking. That's called the perineal region or perineum, right? Now, the perineum is interesting because in women, within the perineum region, you have tissue that separates the vagina from the rectum, okay? For some women, not an insignificant number of women every year, during childbirth, as the baby tears its way out, it will cause the vagina to tear and then break into the perineal region, and then from there, break into the rectum. And what you'll have happening after that is that feces will start leaking from the rectum into the woman's vagina through the perineal region. Can you imagine how nasty that must be, right? But that's a thing that happens and it's reasonably common after childbirth, right? Then now, the back of the leg is called the crural region. Sorry, the back of the leg is the sural region. SU. And the front was the crural. Then again, we already mentioned that the thigh is called the femoral. Now this one here, what I tend to notice is that anytime people know a muscle, if I say gluteus maximus, everybody knows this one. That's the muscle of the butt, right? That's the gluteal muscle, the buttocks muscle. And we mentioned already the lower back is the lumbar region, and that your back is also called the dorsum or dorsal region. And vertebral or spine. Okay. Oh, the sole of the foot is also the plantar. Okay, so we've gone through quite a few terms here. Okay. And of course, you know the answer to the question already. Yes, you are expected to remember them. All right. You are definitely expected to remember all of them. No, we're actually going pretty darn fast. I only have what's it here? 6 or 7 slides left. So let's just finish it and then we can call it a night, right? Now, body cavities. So we just spoke about different regions of the body. We spoke about the abdomen and pelvic cavities and their sub-regions, but there are other cavities that the body will have in addition to those, right? So we're now going to talk about those other additional cavities. What is a cavity? It is a space within the body that contains internal organs, right? And there are two major cavities. The two biggest cavities are called the dorsal cavity. And of course, you all know dorsal is back. And the ventral cavity. And you all know ventral is front, right? Already using the terms, right? The dorsal cavity is the smaller of the two. In the dorsal cavity, you have the brain and you have the spinal cord, right? Brain and spinal cord. Now, obviously, since these two separate structures, those two separate structures are also going to be in separate sub cavities, okay? So, no surprise, the brain is in the cranial cavity because cranium, right, for skull, and the vertebra is in the spinal cavity, as in spinal cord, right? So that should make sense. So your dorsal cavity, the second biggest cavity, is made up of two smaller cavities. One is the cranial cavity, because the brain is in there. Another one is the vertebral or spinal cavity, because the spinal cord is in there, right? The ventral cavity now is going to be the biggest cavity. Pretty much every other cavity except the ones that I just mentioned will be in the ventral cavity. As it says here, body cavity is the space of the body's trunk anterior to the vertebral column and posterior to the sternum and abdominal muscle wall. All right? So, here we go. Cranial cavity and vertebral cavity give you the dorsal cavity. All right? Cranial cavity, vertebral cavity equal dorsal cavity. The thoracic cavity, where your lungs and your heart sit, the abdominal pelvic cavity, which you just look through, both of those together are going to give you the ventral cavity. So obviously the ventral cavity is much bigger than the dorsal cavity, right? Now, let's look at the thoracic part of it. We'll soon finish. So remember, thoracic cavity, chest cavity. What's in the chest cavity? Your lungs. Now, each organ is going to have their separate cavity. Just like how the spinal cord had its own cavity, and the brain had its own cavity within the ventral cavity, within the dorsal cavity, sorry. Then the internal organs in your chest have to have their own cavities. So you have a cavity for the lungs. That one is called the pleural cavity, right? Then now the heart itself has its own cavity. No surprise, it's called the pericardial cavity. Because cardia as in cardiac, as in heart, right? And peri now refers to something around. So the pericardial cavity is going to be around, of course, the heart. That said, running down the middle of the chest is its own cavity called the mediastinum. And the pericardial cavity is inside that other cavity. And they're all in the thoracic cavity, right? So far, I have divided your thoracic cavity into parts. You have the pleural cavity around the lungs. You have the mediastinum that runs right down between the lungs. And then within that mediastinum, you have the pericardial cavity where sits your heart, right? So remember now, every time I talk about the cavity, what do? I tell you what organs are found in it, which means you need to remember what you find in it, right? We already did the abdominal pelvic cavity, and you already know that you need to go through and ensure you remember what exactly is in there, right? All right. We already did that for level of organization, so that's fine. Tomorrow we're going to look at the different the major types of body tissue. And by that time, mostly mean epithelial tissue and connective tissue. So tomorrow for that one, right? Now I am of course going to ask you to use the 40 minutes you have left here. Because I know I gave you a lot of information. I don't want to overload your brain. Use the 40 minutes you have here to just read over the PowerPoint presentations. I strongly advise you to ensure that you always read back over before you call it a night. The information is still relatively fresh in your brain. If you read it again, it lets your brain know this information is important. Please store it. If you simply go to your bed without doing that, you're going to lose most of it, right? So please take the next 40 minutes to review what we just did. Because obviously, quite a big chunk of it is brand new information. And yes, I know it's a plenty of information, right? All right. Any questions before we go? All right. All right, folks. Then remember, tomorrow, I think we started at what time? 5:15, I think it was. Or was it
Yes, sir.
5:30? I don't even remember. Somewhere between 5:15 and 5:30. Let's call it 5:30. 5:30 to 7 tomorrow.
Okay, sir.
All right, folks. Have a good night.